Okay, so a little bit of background about Alvin. So many of you know him, but probably don't know where he came from. So Alvin, before he came to us, was an editor for Fairfax Community News and then News Local. He also was a media communicator for WWF Australia and most recently Primary Communication, who is an agency specialising in corporate clients in the energy, transport, IT and not-for-profit sectors. And he's worked for us now for 5 years, 6 years. Yes. All right. Thank you.
And just very quickly, while I was at Fairfax and News, I also did a lot of design there. I was working myself.
Can you hear us, CCRC?
Yes. Yes.
Voice from above.
Yes. Yes.
Do you have a question or?
Yes.
Whatever, I'll continue.
But we don't hear you.
Basically, the idea for this came about.
You actually get a working.
Everyone.
Mute your microphone, please.
That worked.
They can't hear you. Oh, that's even worse. So it could be an advantage. But this came about because at the last workshop I was sitting there chatting to people, and I always thought, like I did with journal articles, that there was some kind of mysterious reason that you did posters the way you did, and that's the way it was taught and the way science did. And exactly, that was the shocking thing. I found out that no one's taught, and it's kind of like handed down like this strange thing from supervisor to student. And it explained why so many of the posters actually don't follow basic design fundamentals. Now today is a really abridged version. It probably needs a proper workshop sitting down when you all have posters to do, so I'm going to kind of rush through it. But this is a process with design tips thrown in. The process pretty much takes up the first 4 slides, and after that it's all little bits of extras. So to start with, we go back to the most basic thing that we do with every piece of communication. What do you hope to achieve? Now, if you just want to do a poster to go along in a conference and not hang around at all, don't worry about this. You shouldn't even be interested. But if you want to talk to people, pay attention to this. If you want to win a poster prize, it really depends on where you go. If you go to AGU, don't follow any of these guidelines. They like big journal articles, basically, and someone likes how novel the science might be. I've read, when I went researching academic posters online to find out the mysteries of it all, that there are people who have won academic poster prizes and never spoken to a single person through the entire conference. To me, that's not a good point. So you've got to think what you hope to achieve, and I'm assuming it's to talk to peers in some way. So if you know who your audience is, what are the things that you want to tell them? What do you want out of it? And we did this kind of thing with Melissa, and I had to put together a poster really, really quickly for her, basically in the space of a day. And those are the questions that we asked. What do you want to achieve? And she listed the things that she wanted to achieve. Then you said, who's your audience? So, and what action do you want them to take? So these are the kind of things you've got to think about before you even start a poster. A lot of head stuff goes on before we even get to any actual design. Simple stuff. If you hadn't checked the instructions and decided on orientation, forget it. You're not going to get anywhere. That's just basic stuff. But the thinking is much more important before you start to design in any kind of design. The second thing you want to do is you assemble your components. Now, these are the key components. You do not want to start designing anything until you have the components in place first. Your first component is a key figure or image, okay? It can't be, I see so many posters where they have just kind of figures sprawled across them, and you come up and you're trying to work out what's going on. You should be able to see straight away what's going on. There should be a figure that someone who walks past, who's working in your field, walks past, looks at it and goes, ooh. Now that's what we need. So that's what you're looking for. It can't be a pretty picture, it's got to tell a story. Second thing, the headlines. A lot of the headlines in journal articles which end up on top of posters are a complete waste of time. We even know from research that the shorter, sharper headlines on journal articles actually end up with more citations and get more read. If you've got a poster and you want people to stop, it needs to be a really good statement at the top. Generally short, generally sharp. It does not have to be your title. You're trying to attract attention, not to just put your poster up. A really good way of doing headlines is having something doing something to something else, an action on it. It's not necessary, but you must come up with a good headline. This stuff is what stops people. That's why it's important. A lot of the posters you don't stop because there's just too much going on. The first line is really important. We have lots of research in media and outside of media that shows that if your first line and whatever it is that you're doing, the top piece is strong, people will stop and start to read and start to pay attention and probably have a conversation with you. And when it comes to journalism, where I used to work, we know that if you have a good, strong first line and people read it, the chances of them reading a whole story is much more. This is also true with posters. It works on the same principles. And a lot of these are comms principles that I repeat time and time again. Text, 400 words, no more. You are not presenting every single piece of your research and every single piece of the detail. What you are trying to do is to get them and come to have a conversation with you. If you're going to do something that is very dense and very thick, and I saw a few of these in Amos last year, or this year, it's not often you'll see people stopping in front and reading them. You've got to think about what makes people stop. If there's a big chunk of text, too much work. Posters are different from journal articles or anything else that you do. So assemble those 4 things. You still haven't put pen to paper, opened your software, and I wouldn't expect you. Now I'm going to ask something here. It's a little bit more metaphysical, and I'm going to demonstrate it with probably one of the ugliest posters I've seen. It's an all right poster. There's a lot of things wrong with it. But what it does do really, really well is a theme. And I don't think, and the reason I've chosen this poster, because when I went looking for posters with a theme, this was the only one I could find. And you might be going, well, what's a theme? So let's say you're doing heat waves. A theme is basically taking the idea that you're putting forward, whatever proposition you're putting forward, and you're thinking of what are the associated colours? What are the design elements we can use? What are the things that we can put in? And if you see here, like this is all about food, essentially corn. And up at the top here, he's used corn as a thing. This here, he's designed all these wonderful little dentisters and then not used them. That's the kind of thing you could slap them for. He's got tractors in here. He's got all these things. All these things are design elements. Nearly all of them are really poorly used. But he's actually thought about the theme of what his poster is about. And then the colours kind of reflect it as well. And in fact, it's a really small colour palette, but with a couple of variations in hue and tint and tone. Now, if you start to think about your posters, if you're doing something on ice, if you're doing something on oceans, if you're doing something on plants and drought, those themes already have colour associations. They already have elements that you can bring into a poster and make repetitive elements and actually make your poster stand out. If you think about a thing, your poster starts to kick out a lot more, gives you design ideas. It'll, instead of sitting there going, oh, what colours should I use? They come out of your theme. The theme is a nice little guideline to get things going. So I highly recommend it. If you can see a theme in your poster, go for it. Now, these are your 3 most important tools. And I've actually set up a whole bunch of grids, which I will put on the website. These things, which are really, really simple. Now, the one I've used here, if you do this, it saves you an immense amount of time. Everyone I've spoken to about posters so far opens up their software and starts arranging. What a grid has multiple good uses. As you can see, this is what we call an 8-line grid. It's just a modular grid. When we start drawing on it and setting it up, it's called a dummy. So we're dummying up our poster. Now, as you can see, I've got bricks for headlines. Whenever I use an image, put a cross on it. This is just text. You can actually dot point text, but it allows me to do quite a lot of things. And I didn't even think about this. It's just drawing it up really quickly. This is your most powerful tool because you can draw them up incredibly quickly. You can come up with 10 ideas probably in about 15 or 20 minutes. And then you can sit there. And then when you start to design on whatever piece of software you use, this tells you where to place things and gives you sizes straight away. Now, you might be looking at it and thinking, this is a waste of time. It's a waste of time until you start to use it. Now, the interesting thing with this is I talk to people about how I use an 8-column or an 8-column grid, or an 8-column dummy. That doesn't mean I have 8 single columns of text. What it means is they create special divisions. So I've got, this is actually a 4-column division. I've split across 2 columns. And here I've created an inset, which allows me to know that I've got a 4 columns width, which is still wide enough to go around, and I can actually wrap around this and do things. So it allows you to put things so that they break across columns. But most of all, what this does, and it does really well, is when you put it in, it lines everything up. When you line everything up, it has a huge, huge importance on how your design flows and how it works. I cannot recommend that enough. If you don't dummy up your poster before you do a poster, it won't work. This makes a massive difference. Now, curious, what do you think of these posters? Feedback will be welcome. Are they beautiful? Would you stop and read them? Anyone here would actually stop and read this poster? Okay. Well, just in case you were wondering, these are online, what they recommend academics to use. And what's really sad about them, I've seen these posters, they are just ugly. And all of you are sitting here looking at, I'm not going to read this, I don't have the time. This one is supposed to be by a guy who's an expert in the field. Surprisingly, he's a scientist, not a designer. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of little things. Where do you think is the best real estate on a poster? Now, you're going to build a really great house. You're going to do it on a good piece of land with a fabulous view. What's the best location?
Center. Top fold. Top left.
Okay, so what do we normally put up at the top? The ugly titles. But look, I just added a photo at the top. Change that. This stuff, this is real estate. These are the strongest parts of your posters. And what do? An introduction, a title, and sort of a mess in the middle. When someone stops to look at your poster, they're usually interested in the results. They're not interested in how you got there. We're not telling people, look, had this great idea, thought I'd do this. We're actually saying, this is what I found, because people want to know what you found. So what is the most important thing in your poster? What is going to make people stop and look and think? It goes here, in the strong parts, and it goes big. What's most important for your poster should be the biggest and most prominent. So I can't, I'm just checking to see if I'm going there. Not sure I am, but we waste a lot of this excellent space at the top. We put logos in here, we put our institutions, we do long two-deck sentences for no good reason. And our good stuff, so many times, the results, they end up here, right at the bottom. One of the weakest parts of the poster lives down here. What's the strongest part of your poster should go here. So I want you, when you approach posters, to rearrange the way you think about it. Your job is to make people stop and talk to you. So put your best stuff at the top. Don't hide your light under a bushel. So it's really important that you do that. Now I'm going to go through some just design considerations. Basically what I've just given to you is pretty much the way it should go. And in fact, I've seen some really nice stuff where people put their logos down the bottom and all the rest of it, so that all the good stuff is at the top. Now, the ratio of images to text usually runs at about 1/3. So it should at least be, for every 2 lots of text, there should be at least 1 of images. So look at this. This is all pretty text heavy. This guy thinks he's done wonderful images. Let me just change the ratios for you. Can you see the difference, the lift that gets just by, this is about, well, that's actually pretty close to a half. You have to have good image spaces. You've got to use images well. You've got to balance it. So don't do too many images, or you start your text and your poster starts to look a little light, and don't use too much text, but it starts to look too dense. So a 2/3 ratio, just on average, I mean, there's always variation, none of these rules are hard and fast, is generally a pretty good estimate to run with. The other thing is that, and I see this all the time, you can probably wander outside the room and see it, not all images are equal. Now, when I look at this design here, this is from one of my favourite design books, the Newspaper Designer's Handbook by Jim Harrower, which, even though it's about newspapers, I highly recommend. All of these images are the same. And so the eye doesn't know where to go. And a big part of poster design and any design is taking the eye somewhere. So all they've done is they've taken the exact same images and they've transferred them across over here. And now we have a major image. that takes the eye, and the other images are scattered. So there's none of these kind of blockiness that you get. And what we know is that our eyes tend to go from image to caption down to headlines. This is actually the really, really grand flow. But there's a lot of other nice things about this design that I'd like to take you through. Remember how I was talking about the grid? This is done on what I would guess is probably a 16-column grid. And the grid forces you to line things up. Now you might notice, you guys are terrified of white space. You use boxes and you use screens all the time. And yet, we've got white space running here. Doesn't match here, right? And we've got all sorts of interesting things. This is actually used white space to create forms. Now have a look at this. Simply by running on a grid, this captions runs in line with the headline, the drop graph, and body text. That has created a line. And if you were to shift one of those slightly left or right, that design would fall apart. Alignment is really powerful, really useful. So you create alignments. The other thing that's been really interesting here is that creates its own box. The edge of the photo lines up with the top of the head, the edge of the head lines up with the body font, all the way around. Alignment. This is because someone has used a grid. Grids are really powerful. Down the bottom, another box. Same thing. Images line up, images line up. Now this is really interesting. Because you've got this line up here, this creates this as a third box without creating a box, because the eye draws the line there and draws the line there. We do that all the time without even thinking about it. So you don't need boxes, you need alignment. Alignment will save you from the curse of boxes. And the last one is the whole thing, boxes itself. It's actually on a lot of white space, very common with magazines, where white space is quite accurate. White space looks elegant. If you want to talk about wealth, if you see wealthy advertisements for something that's wealthy, lots of white space. If you get one of those books with all the discount specials, no white space at all. One's cheap, one's rich. What kind of posters are you guys designing? And the last thing, see this? You don't need a box. Those two lines have created a box. Okay, so if you can avoid boxes and use white space, go for it. It makes a much more elegant poster. Okay, other design considerations. I'm going to take you through, this is a real menu. If you ever go to Gertrude's Piano Bar, you would have had fun trying to read that. And the issue with this, aside from all caps, which is never a good thing, is two very, very fundamental things that will also help you avoid boxes and will help give you a logical flow through your poster. The first one is proximity. Now we've taken off the caps, and what you've done is you've taken the things, you've created a kind of a headline, and you've kept them together, and you've created white space between each of those. By doing that, by creating what we call proximity, these things that belong together are close together. You don't need a box again. You wouldn't want to go through and box each one of those. So proximity is all about taking things that are together and making sure they are close together. It sounds like a really obvious and simple thing, but I see it again, time and again in posters. The closer something is together, they're linked. And it allows you to create space and allows you to bring white space into it. So it's really important. Proximity is simple. The other one is hierarchy. Now, when I look at posters, you should go through and you can have your big headline in whatever font it might be, then you have a subhead, and then you have text. And they're all kind of different. And you repeat that. And by repeating that, you're showing that they are all belonging to something. So this is also, so what's happened here is the head now on each of those is different. Everything else is still the same, bit of a change of color as well. But the inset has also created two things. One, it's still together because you have this lovely line going through it. But the second thing is that it's created this as being more senior. So you're creating a seniority. Your fonts and your text can create a hierarchy, which you should use repeatedly. So you separate it so that things that's together stay together, and then those items within that, you give a hierarchy. That's really important to do with all kind of poster design as you go through. And a lot of this stuff is just, you know, these are just tips more than anything else. The actual process is earlier. Okay, this, when we talked about the poster before, the strongest parts follow the way we read. We read left to right and up to down. So that's the way the poster flow generally runs. If you actually have a leg of text stick up on the right, it actually sometimes doesn't, you can't quite work out where to start. So if you can find a way to follow that through, that's fine. And good designs will help you with that, working on the grid. That's just a sense. You can break this, but I thought it's worth going. But the other reason I put this poster up, or this particular one up, is because you guys love putting screens and text over photos. If you're going to put a text over a photo, it's got to have a solid color. I was looking yesterday, at dinner yesterday, I was having a wrap, and I was trying to read the instructions to take it off. Some idiot put yellow text over orange, and I couldn't read it. I'm getting old. Come on, I'm in my 50s now. So it also confuses you. There's a whole lot of things, particularly when you have multiple colors. So if you were going to put "if you must," do it on a really simple blank space. Use a sans serif font. Now, do we know the difference between serif and sans serif, or am I speaking gibberish? Sometimes I do, sometimes. Okay, these are sans serif fonts. They have none of the little nice little tweaky things that poor people at the Bureau and Australian Research Council have to deal with. The reason you use sans serif is a thing called dot gain. When you do a print and the ink hits the page, it actually expands very slightly. Now, if you put text, white text particularly, over a screen, and you have a serif that comes into a nice fine point, when those dots hit, they start to close out. The serif starts to disappear. And a lot of those serif fonts also have very, very thin stands. So they're ascenders and descenders, and they start to disappear. So the two things you must do if you must use a screen, and I would only use them to get attention: bold, sans serif font, because otherwise you can end up seeing the text disappear. And I've seen that too at posters in Amos last year. The other thing is to use a contrasting color. Now, when I say contrasting color, I don't mean red on blue, which people seem to think is good. Might look all right in a computer screen when it's glowing at you, but in print, you can't read it. So quite often the colors, the complementary colors that are opposite each other, become very hard to read in print, even though you can read them quite easily on a computer or something that has a screen coming out of it. So make sure that it's a strong contrast, whites and pale colors on dark colors, something close to black or much darker on light colors. And if you have a light and a dark color, get rid of it, because you're going to struggle with it. Now, readability is an issue. Generally, we talk about having about 24 points, but except there's a problem. Now, every font has a thing called an Xheight, and the Xheight is these kind of vowels and letters that don't go right up to the top, your ascenders, or drop below the line. Now, the thing with fonts is that they all have different Xheights. These two here are exactly the same point size, but the Xheight on Garamond is lower than on Times. Now, that means that if I walk way back, the font that I'm most likely to stop being able to read first is Garamond, because the Xheight helps with readability. So if you have two fonts side by side, try to go for one with a larger Xheight, unless the Xheight really pushes close. So judge whether something is readable by Xheight, not by point size. Point size can lead you astray. Really important to know. There was something else I was going to say, but it's gone now. So think about Xheight. And let's talk a little bit more about text. Try not to use more than 3 different fonts. And if you, even better, use something from the same font family. We've already talked about the hierarchy. So if you use one font for the headline, it stays in the headlines. You might use it in the subheads. You use a different font for your text. If you have fonts that look all the same, you end up with this, which is pretty dull. And the eye is not going anywhere. You might notice I put ragged right preferable. It's just ease of reading. It's usually easier to read. But let's take this. If you were going to use a different font, say not go with a font family, No half measures. Big contrast, because the eye goes differently. Okay, if you're going to have a contrasting font, it can't be subtle. It's got to be strong, because that will take the eye exactly where you want it to go. This is about leading the eye through the poster where you want it to go. So if you're going to change the font, all in. Okay, no half measures. Now, if we're talking about fonts, these are some wonderful sites for you. This is kind of really subtle stuff that makes a huge difference. Like photography, fonts use the golden ratio. Now, the golden ratio is something where our eye is naturally drawn to things that fit together very well. They've actually shown that using golden ratios between the headline, the size of the headline, the size of the body text, actually increases readership quite a lot. And this golden ratio, this wonderful one here, which is personified, that one there, not only does it give you the kind of golden ratio, what it's really good for is if you have a column that you've set up. So when we set up our column before, it tells you exactly the size and how many words across. It'll actually set up your typeface, and it makes it much more readable. It actually sets up the size of it, the leading, which is the space between, and everything else. It makes, if you ever get to use it, it makes it so much easier to read and so much nicer. This layout down here is for setting proportions. So you put in your typeface and you put in the size that you want it to be, and it says that would make a good thing for your heading, and the next lowest should be this. Now these are probably running at a ratio looking at them, and you can convert it to points. I just did the screen type with the times. They look to me to be about 36, 30, 24, 18. So they're going down to sixes, which is pretty common. And this last one is just if you run into conversions, you'll go to some sites and they give you M's and points and pixels and peters, and you think, what the hell does this mean? That'll convert it for you. So type, scale, and personified are really good. That one's just for converting, probably for more technical things. On the other side, I just want to quickly go through color. So remember the theme that we had, that you started at the top with? These are kind of things where you start to think a little bit more detail around color. Simple one. Blue colors go, or cool colors go backwards, warm colors come forward, and they look bigger. So that's actually why we use warm colors to accent things. So that's just a simple thing that you should know for these. If you're having trouble choosing a theme, try using a photo. These are really, or a piece of image. You can actually pull colors out, and there is a site that actually helps you do this, which I'll point to later. You can actually pick something you like and use that as your color scheme. So if you've got a fantastic photo where you think the colors are right, or it's a piece of art you like, or whatever. And remember, colors are mood and emotions as well. So they're not just, oh, it's a pretty color. They actually conduct, you know, they send out things. Is it strong? Is it weak? Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it sad? Is it happy? So color's important. But be very careful how you use it. Use a kind of a dominant color, and then maybe not such a strong, and then something that's an accent. A dominant color used in larger areas, and then use, sorry, not dominant color, but make a color dominant. Make others kind of work the small things, the detail. This is a lovely example of that. I mean, you're looking at really, really dark, almost black, but they use the gold and the white to create a totally different feel to it. If you try and share your colors around like we were sharing photos around before, you end up with something that just looks splotchy. So kind of choose what is the key color, what is the key theme, and how do the other colors work off it. So just a quick thing to think about. And I'm going to run through some other little color things. Colors with a common hue, which would be, these ones all have blue as a common hue. They actually create depth. So if I was to do red, it would be red, yellow, and orange. They actually, if you put them together and use them together, they create a sense of something being forward and something being back. Really, really common. So that's something to think about, just in terms of if you want to play with depth and color. This, when you look at it on a computer screen, it's going to make you blind. Opposite colors, opposite each other on the color wheel, they always are quite strong and they sing. And when they print it, they do that as well. but you have to be very careful. I've actually put a letter on top of that on purpose because you really do not want to. Just because they're opposite colours. When you put opposite colours and you put text of an opposite colour on top of the screen, it hurts. And the other thing, now these are called split complements. And a split complement, colours on opposite sides of the colour wheel are called complementary colours. What you do is you pick one of those, primary colour of some kind, and on the opposite side you come down, and then you pick the colours either side of it. Now, for some reason, probably unknown to man, they tend to be really easy to work with in terms of putting the colour together and making things sing off each other. Just a couple of little tips. Try not to go more than 5 colours, unless you're Stephanie, of course. So that will kind of help you keep things together. Now, some wonderful colour sites. Canva, which does lots of presentations, they've got a lovely thing where you just go in, you drag in the photo that you like, and it will automatically pull out 5 colours for you. Really lovely. Adobe Colour Wheel, you can play for your life on this one. The Adobe Colour Wheel, you can choose different types of colours. You can move them backwards in and out to change the hues and the tones. It allows you to play with a whole lot of colours, and if you click over there, I think, yeah, there, there's a lot of preset themes that other people have used, most of them graphic designers, and even better, you can set up your own themes. You create a colour theme that you like off this wheel, save it for later. So it's quite nice. And I've included Ed Hawkins here because his sort of band the rainbow type of stuff, he does have some really interesting advice on colours, particularly for science, and I feel like and after what he showed to us, that was really useful. Yes?
Comment from the video conferencing people around being aware of colour blindness and particularly red-green.
Planet Lab book. That's Ed Hawkins. It exactly talks about all of those things. And there are actually a lot of good sites online where you can put something in, and I should have actually included those now I think about it, and see how a colourblind person would see them. So it's always worth thinking about. Now, I want to... apps you can download. Yes, good point, yeah. So there's lots of that stuff out there. In fact, I'll probably get that one off you too. Now, I want to talk about the difference. I don't know how many of you had the experience that something looked fantastic on the screen and you printed it and it turned out crap. That's because they work differently. At the top is RGB, it's your computer. It's actually the way our eyes tend to see. And this is how colours work when there is light projecting from behind them. So they actually, and what you'll see here with the white in the centre, that's because if you add green and red and blue, white is the result. And in fact, it was seeing somebody say that the 3 primary colours are red, green and blue at a university teaching people how to design posters that really got me doing this. When you print, it's subtractive. They actually use forings. The idea is this cyan, which is a form of pure blue, magenta, which is a kind of a red with, see, when you print that red at the top, you'd actually have blue ink in there to get that red. This is the red that you get without any blue in it. And this is the pure yellow, and then you have your mixes. They include black because these are supposed to come together with printing and form a perfect black, but it's not quite there. So black is the 4th ink that drops on, and it's usually the last. But the issue is, and I'll go over here, this is the kind of visible spectrum. It's a lovely little graph by Print Ninja. And it's worth going to have a look at some of the Print Ninja articles. What you look at is this yellow triangle is what we see. And this one here, sorry, this big one, the yellow triangle is actually RGB. So what our computers can see. And there's kind of variations on that all the way down. But this is the spectrum that you get, this little one here, on print. It actually produces a lot less. And where you see the most impacts with this kind of stuff are on the really bright colours. They actually dull down quite a lot. That and also the dot gain that I talked about before can actually dull down quite a bit. Now the really good thing is a lot of the new printing techniques now have things that translate. So the software kind of works that out. And there's also the printers themselves have smaller dots. But the best thing you can do to avoid having this issue where something you've got on the screen suddenly looks very different, convert what you have to CMYK. You'll find that most programs can save as CMYK. So go and have a look at that, whatever you're using. If for some reason that doesn't, save it as a PDF, pass it to someone with Photoshop and they can do it for you. Because when you save it to CMYK, the colors alter and you actually get to see what you're more likely to present. And in doing that, you end up having a better idea and you can still make adjustments. So because we're working on a print basis here, it's probably best to go into whatever program you're using and set it for CMYK, not for RGB. RGB looks lovely, but it's lying. And this last one is very, very important, and that's screen color. Print to PDF. When you save it as a PDF, do not save as PDF, because the issue you have then is with fonts. If you save to PDF, that means whoever your printer is has to have the same font, because they actually have font classes. And if they don't, it will completely change your text. They'll try and get something close, but it will never be quite the same, and you'll wonder why things aren't how you imagined. When you print to PDF, you're actually just printing the shapes. And so when they get the file that is a print to PDF file, they just print what's there. You don't have to have the fonts of the font family. So when you're saving to a PDF to send it to the printers, print to PDF, do not save. So I'm just going to give you a quick, and like I said, it would be much better to do a workshop and take our time. There's a lot of things I haven't covered here, and a lot of things that actually doing them you would find would work, but I am available if you want to chat to me. So basically I'm going to finish with a checklist. If you are putting together a poster, I don't want you touching any software until you have worked out your audience, what the key point or points are that you want to make, you've assembled your key components, and you've got a theme. And I know that sounds kind of really a bit wanky, but themes are incredibly useful. And I want you to have drawn it up on a grid. Okay, and think about all the things that we talked about when you're putting it together on the grid. So think about your image to text ratio, where the best real estate on your poster is, that not all images are equal, so there must be different sizes for balance, your proximity, your hierarchy, and just the logical flow. Only then, after you've done those things and drawn them up, go into your software program. And then there's just the other little bits and pieces. So I hope some of that was useful. I'd love to do a workshop at some point for 2 or 3 hours and do it properly. But that's the kind of real basics of just making a poster work that will actually get things out. That's it. Questions?
Hey, questions?
Yes.
In terms of the theme, so I, for example, normally present in a hydrology section at a conference, and when you think of water, you think blue. So all the posters there are blue. So how do you actually stand out when you try and come up with a relevant theme that everyone else is?
Well, you can always
We didn't hear the question, Alvin.
Oh, sorry. Anna basically said that if you go to a conference like she does, which is hydrology, all the posters are blue, which is true. If you know that's going to be the case, then you think about, well, you can just choose not to be blue. You don't have to follow a theme. A theme is just a way of helping you. And even if you choose different colors, you can still choose design elements that go with what you're doing. So, and it's likely to be that there is something within sort of subsets of hydrology. But if worst comes to worst, don't do it. Just go with a mood and pick your colors. Go with a photo that you like. So design is very personal as well. You don't have to necessarily follow the rules, but it helps to know the rules to break them well. So, yes.
You said something about making your headline active.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I've kind of written about this before. Basically, headlines tend to be, I guess, they're kind of third person and really passive. And whenever I look at journal headlines, an active headline means both it's spoken in active voice, so it's not about what has happened. You won't see many INGs there. And it's also usually about something acting on something else, like tigers roar or rip apart panthers, you know, whatever it might be, even though that's a kind of a big, you know, and it's about a football team. Or, you know, the market doesn't just, you know, fall. The market plummets and hits a new low. So, you know, something is happening and it's impacting something else. That tends to be the way it works. Looking at newspaper headlines is a great way to come up with good headlines for your own. But whatever you do, I think the key thing, even if it's not necessarily active, is that it's short and it's clear and it says something that people working in your field who you want to talk to will stop to ask more about. I'm happy to work on headlines with people and find ways of doing it. But a lot of good headlines are playful. So they actually just take the piss a little bit or whatever. And people stop just because of that too. So yeah, play with it, have a bit of fun, use imagery where it is, make sure that it doesn't just slow down, it hits a wall. You know, that's the kind of thing that you probably need to do. But yeah, short, sharp. So happy to talk on a sort of one-on-one basis if you want, if you've got a headline you need.
I usually use PowerPoint to make my posters, but what
Joy. Was the Adobe products. InDesign is absolutely fantastic because a lot of the things that we do automatically for a poster you can find there, and that's what it's for. Illustrator, that's a hell of a learning curve. And there's all the other ones like PageMaker and things like that. I have heard rumours that there are people who even code their own posters.
Yeah,
Oh my God. Okay. The idea of that just terrifies me. So any kind of program, in fact, you know, PowerPoint is the most used, but it's actually quite cumbersome and clumsy. And alignment's a real issue. Even the latest version they've removed the ability to create grids, but they've thrown in the ability to do columns. And if you ever get a few of the things, like a really interesting thing is people can do a column, but they don't know how far apart it is before they start the next column of text, and you see them kind of shifting it backwards and forwards. Really easy way to work it out, put an M. Just a capital M between the columns will give you probably what's a good distance. Yes?
Any of the software you just mentioned free or not the price of the Adobe Creative Suite?
Mm.
Yeah.
You can get just like Illustrator for £15.
You can go even cheaper through the uni.
Yes. Thank you. Go. You found it, you tell. Go. Oh, yeah, after I paid for it, then he goes and shows me how I can get it for $12.
Really, really sneaky as a way you can get the entire Creative Cloud suite for about $12.
Yeah.
As a student or as...
No, staff people can do it too.
I think you have to be staff, but it's okay. You can fudge that and just be like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just get Stephen.
That's a shade.
There are some online. In fact, Canva, even though it's for online creation, Canva is a really good website where it's got incredibly good design advice. Canva. But they also have really cheap and maybe even free software from memory that will actually help you create posters online. I'll check for a few more too. I do know there are some free products out there. It's just a matter of quality. And because I already have them at home and here I haven't investigated them, but I can investigate them for you and put them up. So yes. Yes.
When you say, when you print a PDF,
yeah.
does that mean it's no longer editable if you then want to do that? So that's like the data.
No, it is, but it won't recognize the words as
words.
It will recognize them as strings.
Yeah.
So you want to do that as well? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But then you just save the original document anyway, right?
Yeah. So you should still have the
PDFs and then work on that in Illustrator.
Illustrator actually, when you say PDF, Illustrator, it actually saves a copy of the Illustrator native format inside it. It's actually 2 files.
Yep.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Don't ask me, they're fine. They've totally got it. I would talk to Willem and James. Yeah. But that's true. But the only reason you do print to PDF is because if you save to PDF, it keeps the fonts, so it is still editable. But quite often a print house, particularly if you're using cheap or free fonts, which have been made, which students have to use, there's all sorts of kerning issues with those as well. But that's for another day. But they won't have those fonts. And so they'll substitute it for another font. And all of a sudden the font is slightly longer than it was or slightly taller and it starts to move things around. And so what you had that was nice and neat suddenly shifts and you're getting hyphens and orphans and widows and all sorts of things. So Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of thing, yeah, if you print a PDF, that ceases to be an issue. And they can just print straight off that.
I think, can we get rid of the slides? Oh, I can probably do that. And I just thought, I wondered if there was anyone on Zoom that had a question who wants to speak up and use mic, or otherwise type a question here. This way we can see some of you.
Oh, hello. Oh, they're running away.
Now that's come back. How do we get rid of that again? There we go. Yeah. So we can see those of you that have your, oh man.
Don't worry.
How do we get rid of that? Have your cameras on. If anyone has questions, speak up or type them in the text.
Or send me an email. That's all right.
No, let's, anyone?
I think they're done.
No? Okay.
Cool. James.
A lot of people like, I don't know whether it's just feel like, oh, I'm not allowed to do this, or whether it's just like, I'm not sure what to do, so I'll just use this. But I feel like most people tend to just fall back on like a department template.
Yeah.
And so it's okay to sort of like shove institutional logos in a corner, and obviously you've got every affiliation.
It depends very much on the institution, I found. The thing with why institutions stick their stuff at the top of templates is because it's good brand advertising for them. They're actually taking over your poster and putting their branding in your space, in the best space of the whole poster. When we did Melissa's poster, every single logo went along the bottom. Her photo went at the top though, so that people knew who actually did the poster and stopped her and talked to her even when she wasn't beside her poster. So that's, you know, to me, this is your poster, your real estate. By all means, let them have their branding. There'll be some institutions that will say, no, you've got to do this across the top. But anyone who wants to put UNSW yellow branding across the top needs to have their head red. It's ugly in the first place. And it's not doing you a service. Yes.
For me, and I just typed this to the Zoom participants, please always remember the COE logo.
Of course, but I don't mind, and don't tell Andy I said this, I don't mind if it's on the bottom. If it's on the bottom. Even better. Yeah. So, but since we've got the workshop coming up, I'm also happy to make myself available if anyone wants to just go through the process or work through their posters. But the one thing I will absolutely stress is that if you do the elements and you draw it up first, the actual process of poster design becomes so much easier. If you follow that process, even though it seems like some of it's a waste of time, your poster will be done in a day, if that. You know, and when you start doing it regularly, you'll just rip through them. They'll literally take a few hours. Anyway, that's it. Yes.
The 2:3 ratio is 2 for image and 1 for text, or
It can be either, but preferably 2 for text, 1 for image. And place the image high. And the other thing too with images is different sizes and scatter them. Try not to lump them all into one place so that they don't, otherwise you're just going to have a really heavy poster.
What's your take on infographics and poster?
Fantastic idea. I was going to actually do a little piece on that, but
What's infographic?
an infographic is,
Like little factors on there.
oh, they're kind of not, I would call those more dinkuses and things. An infographic is when you're, often you guys do a paper and you'll have a really complex graph there, which you look at, but you can actually step outside of the purely technical side of it, and then you can draw up something. A great infographic I saw was of the Mars lander and how it would land. And it was actually showing it coming down and when things would open and blah, 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 and then how it would land beautifully, which it did. That kind of stuff illustrates a lot of complex information beautifully, really simply. So if you have the skills to make an infographic that takes your very complex or kind of impenetrable graphs and you can translate it into something that people can just see really simply, that's actually very, very powerful. And it's powerful on a lot of levels, not just in terms of doing your poster, but if you've got a media release that you put out and you provide an infographic, that infographic will go everywhere and it will tell the story you want in the way you want. So they're tough and they involve a lot of time, but they are well worth it. Infographics, yeah, absolutely.
There's someone in Hobart who runs a workshop, infographic workshop. I think it's called down one here too.
I reckon we should invite them to our annual workshop. I think that would be really good.
Yeah, I think they're very useful. The workshop I did was just 3 hours one. It's not long enough. I think you should get this day. You only have an introduction.
And I'd be going too, by the way. Yeah.
I have a suggestion from Steph Downs for Gravit, Gravit, as a free design software that she
Nice.
recommends.
Thanks, Steph. And Kasia.
Anything in terms of what to do with captions for your figures? Because I know a lot of science posters have very long, complicated captions. How small can you make them, and can you?
Captions by the times, oh geez, a really difficult one. I think captions depend very much on the importance of the image that you're using and how much it tells a story. If the figure speaks for itself and you don't need the caption to explain it, which is the ideal figure, in fact that should be the way you should be approaching it, then it doesn't matter if the caption is small because hopefully they're having that conversation with you and they may want to look at it later anyway. But if it needs the caption, you should do the caption large and maybe find a clever, creative way of actually lifting it and making it part of the entrance into the thing. So you can actually have a caption that says, this is what you're seeing instead. So that's just you basically take a more creative approach depending on the importance of the caption to what you want to do. Yes, sorry.
On that, it's like annotating a graph, something that's it's not something that you do in a paper, obviously, like, you know, Adobe or stuff, a bit more information actually on the graph, making it a bit more messy, I guess. I
would probably over annotating. I mean, if you have to, you have to, but I would prefer if that's
as opposed to having it in the giving caption. Is that a good thing or not?
It depends on how it impacts, but my feeling is if you're having to do a caption that needs to be read or annotations, you probably need to change your figure. Because the figure that you use does not have to be the same as the figure in your paper. You can change it into something that it's basically conveying the information you want to convey. It doesn't have to be the same at all. If they want to look at the original, I'm sure you've got it there. So yeah, I would alter your figure and maybe just pull out the important part of the figure and do something with it like that. Okay, it's not just a cut and paste. If you posted a cut and paste, you've probably got an issue as well, unless the cut and paste is fantastic. Yeah.
What are references?
I keep thinking I want to stop soon. References right at the bottom. Waste of time. Wow, let me put that another way. They're not part of your design. They're not going to be attracting people into your poster unless there's something about the reference that is kind of like, wow.
Well, like, do you even need to include them?
I don't think so. It's not a paper.
Yeah.
I don't see the point. Your whole point with a poster is to start a conversation. If you start the conversation,
advertise one or two key things. Like
yeah.
Put a reference or two references
Yeah.
there.
And that ugly template thing that we saw at the beginning, the horizontal one, he had us little references down the bottom. Even he realised that if you've got a reference, get it out of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bit dismissive, wasn't it? Okay, I think if you've got any other questions, come and chat to me. My office is open. Thanks.
Thanks,
No worries.